have Chloe here to be our pep talk speaker today. Chloe is a content designer at disability charity Scope and an award-winning disability blogger. So she's going to be talking about living with cerebral palsy and sight loss and how she went from being a subject expert to content designer. Chloe, I think, will be keeping her camera off and we'll be talking without slides. And we do encourage you to do whatever's comfortable for you. But please do mute yourself while Chloe's talking. That would be great. There'll be time for questions at the end. And you're also welcome to post questions and thoughts in the chat as we go. So I will share my screen and I will hand over to Chloe.
Thank you, Nia. Okay, hi everyone. Like Nia's just said, I am Chloe Tia and I am a content designer at Scope. So before I get started, I just kind of want to say if you want to ask me anything, I'll be answering questions at the end. But if your memory is anything like mine, please put them in the chat as we go along and we can just pick that up. That is not a problem. So I went from being a subject expert to a content designer, and the field that I was a subject expert for and actually now a content designer for was around disability and using my own lived experience as a disabled young person. So I am very nearly 25, but 10 years ago I decided to start a blog. Looking back, that's quite a bold move for a 15-year-old. And I don't know why I started it, but I'm still going nearly 10 years on. So I suppose it was the right decision. So the reason why I started my blog was because I was born with mild cerebral palsy. And I suppose I didn't feel myself represented. You know, normally when cerebral palsy was in the media or even spoken about, it tended to be people who were more severe than myself. I kind of, at that moment in time, felt I was sat between non-disabled and disabled and kind of didn't really fit in anywhere. So I also have always attended mainstream education, and I suppose my focus was highlighting what it was like as a disabled student within mainstream education. And at the time, my blog was called Life as a Cerebral Palsy Student. And I kind of documented going from doing my GCSEs right up until graduating university. Then, for obvious reasons, had to rebrand into the blog Chloe Tia that we now see today. All my older posts are still on there, so if you're really committed, you can go back and see the awful things I wrote when I was 15. I probably look back and cringe, but there we go. And I found it quite empowering actually to write my blog, and without kind of realizing, it was more for myself to kind of process what was going on, and to kind of, I suppose, firm my identity as a disabled person, contrary to kind of how I am now. I would describe myself as quite loud and bubbly and can talk for England, but actually the 15-year-old me was a very different person. I was very shy, not confident at all, and would essentially do everything to hide my disability. So why I decided to start a blog about my disability, I'll never know. But actually it was through writing about it that I found like-minded people, I found other people with cerebral palsy, and I initially was in contact with CP Teens UK, who is a charity that kind of set up at the same time as my blog. The founder of the charity is actually now my best friend, but I think that initial contact, it was the first time I'd met someone with cerebral palsy. And at the time I was 18. And again, I think I probably should have met someone before then, but it was joining the online community that really allowed me to kind of explore my identity and actually learn more about my own condition, because cerebral palsy is extremely varied and affects everyone differently. So once I kind of got involved with CP Teens and was an ambassador for them, and this was when I kind of started being in contact with Scope, which is the charity I now work for. So I didn't initially become a subject expert for them. I was actually picked up by, I say picked up, like the social media team and the stories team, and they kind of allowed me to tell my story on a much larger platform. And you know, that led to so many great things, and actually confirmed that I suppose in a way I know what I'm talking about. I think lived experience is one of the most powerful things, because you can't be wrong. It's your experiences, it's what you think. And I suppose that kind of really helped my confidence. And I suppose by this point I'd kind of had a better idea of who I was as a person and kind of how disability fit into that identity. And that was kind of when I started to work as a subject expert. If I remember correctly, Nia was once the content designer I was the subject expert for. I think we were doing like friends and socializing, from memory. And it was something I really enjoyed doing with Scope, to kind of, I could see, obviously from being a blogger and a writer, I could see how my experience was then written up and then used to share, and to kind of give advice to other people. And I thought that was that concept of, I suppose what I now know is content design, is really powerful. And it was almost like, actually, not only can I use my blog for myself. I always said I wrote for myself, I still do. And I suppose if it benefits other people, that's a bonus, I suppose. And I think getting involved from being a subject expert kind of showed me how I can have reinforced like the line of work I knew I wanted to go into. So if we fast forward a little bit, I'm now at university, and during my second year of uni, I did an internship with Scope. It was the first job I'd had. I kind of was not suited for the part-time roles in bars or coffee shops because I can't carry my own drink, never mind everyone else's. And I felt like it was kind of such a perfect role for me. It was from home and it was on their online community. So I was talking to other disabled people about disability, and I absolutely loved it. I think it's such a powerful tool and service that Scope have. And so for the 3 months between my second and third year of university, that's what I did, because I wanted a rock and roll summer, I suppose. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it very much was like I knew I wanted to empower others with the knowledge that I had about disability. And like previously I'd known about kind of PIP, the personal independence payment benefit, and kind of that process. But working on the online community allowed me to learn so much about the technicalities of being disabled, and actually then use that to kind of support other people. So it was kind of like during that time my blog was becoming bigger, I suppose, and I was starting to be paid to write blogs and articles, and this really influenced my kind of decision to apply for a master's in journalism. Now, I think I would just finish my dissertation, and Scope emailed me and was like, "Hey, remember that internship you did? We've now got a permanent role. Do you want it?" Obviously it wasn't that straightforward, and like I needed to interview for it and things. And I've never felt more at a crossroads. Like, did I want to go into journalism and like news and articles, or did I want to go down the advice path? That's kind of like how I saw the distinction and actually work. Now, from about the age of 15, I think I very much was like, I want to work for Scope. So to say I'd already done it in my second year of university, I was like, mission complete. But yeah, I assume you probably guessed, I chose to work for Scope and deferred my master's. And actually, I don't think it's something I will go back to. It's there if I want. But actually, I felt that the advice path was much more suited to myself. So I started working on the online community, and again, was just picking up all the knowledge I needed to, and at the same time, using that to support the content design team as a subject expert. I'm just gonna like stop and get my breath. I feel like I've just been going and going and going. Bear with. Right, where was I? So whilst I was on the online forum, I was still like using my experience within Scope to be a subject expert for the content design team. And I loved the online forum, but I think it very much kind of the pressure and I suppose the mental health side of it, and kind of the day in, day out of like, I suppose, solving people's problems, or like, I think the content on there was like something that was starting to like affect my own mental health. And I think, it was time for me to step back from that, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. And that's when a 6-month secondment came up for the content design team at Scope. And again, it was almost a crossroads. It was, do I leave Scope and freelance? And that freelance would be more like news articles and writing, or do I continue going down the advice path and advising other people and using my lived experience to help other people? So I was like, well, let's see what this is. I had always enjoyed being a subject expert and was really intrigued, I suppose, by the process of not only how you end up with the piece of content, but kind of how you get there in the first place in terms of user research and things like that. So my degree that I did was psychology. So I did kind of lots of analysis of, I suppose, different things, and I kind of felt that fitted with the data of finding needs, or what I now know to be user needs. And I was well and truly welcomed into the content design team at Scope, and the position ended up being made permanent, and I've been there, I think, 2 years, 2.5 years maybe. And like, I suppose you could say the rest is history. I am now somehow a content designer. But I think it's the fact that essentially writing a blog that kind of led me to this in kind of a windy perspective, I suppose. But I think content design is, for me, the perfect match of writing, of it being disability, of it being advice, and of it being data. It's essentially all the things I enjoy in one role, and I get to do every day, which I suppose is, not many people can say that they really enjoy their job. I think for me, that's always been something that I've wanted to do. Obviously, we don't always get the choice of whether we enjoy our job, but I'm very grateful that actually I do. And I think I suppose, working on the content as well. Like, I now I say almost, I don't mean almost, I am, proud to say I'm disabled, and have fully kind of accepted that and embraced that over the 10 years of writing about it. And I think if I hadn't have started my blog and ended up where I am now, I think I would have been a completely different person. And I think my view towards disability would have been completely different. So Scope adopts the social model of disability, and this is something that is reflected in all the content we write. So the social model of disability is, I suppose, a view of the world that has been designed by disabled people for disabled people. Now, the only other main model is the medical model. Now, the medical model says you are disabled. In my instance, because I have cerebral palsy, I have a medical condition that means I am disabled. In contrast, the social model says, actually, it is because of the barriers within society that you are disabled. And those barriers can be physical, like not being able to get into a building. All those barriers can be attitudinal, in terms of people assuming a disabled person doesn't work, for example. And it's actually, if you remove those barriers, you're left with your own permanent condition, but you can access the world. And I think because Scope kind of uses that model within all of its content, it's very much kind of something I've taken on board in my life, and kind of how I view myself as a disabled person. Now, I think I've just seen it, thank you. I think it's, I suppose, really important. And actually, I think being a subject expert in the past makes me a better content designer, because, I saw from when I was a subject expert, kind of, I suppose, how what I said influenced a piece of content, but also having lived experience and being a content designer at times can be a bit tricky. Like, I feel like I do need to take the subject expert hat off, so to speak, especially when it is something that I know a lot about, and it's kind of, I suppose that's the balance and like self-editing that we have to do. But I think all content designers need to do that to some extent, because you need to leave everything or everything you think at the door. And it is down to what the subject expert says, and, the user story, and it's almost not about you. And I think that's definitely, although a subject expert has made me a better content designer, I think that's also why, as a content designer, it might have taken me a while to kind of find my feet. Like, I feel like now I feel like very comfortable within the role, and kind of, dare I say it, know what I'm doing. But then it is nice in a way to kind of get a topic that I know nothing about, because again, I am continually learning about disability and about kind of, I suppose you could argue, my peers and the online community of people. And I think that's extremely powerful. I'm just going to stop unless there's any questions, or if there's anything like anyone wants me to kind of say a bit more about.
So we've got a question from Lizzie in the chat. Any tips on separating the subject knowledge from content design work as you describe?
Oh, hi Lizzie. So do you mean kind of if you have knowledge already, how do you separate that?
Just that thing you were just saying about, when you're the designer and not the subject expert, and you do know things, that thing of kind of separating out, but that wasn't my experience, or that just because that's something I've kind of come across as well, and I'd just be interested if you've got anything that's particularly worked for you. But I know I'm putting you on the spot, so like don't don't worry if you can't think of anything offhand. It's just that interesting because I've just had a similar kind of thing.
No, I think it's like, I suppose it's like, what does the user story say it wants? What is the acceptance criteria? I know kind of content design is done like slightly differently depending on where you are, but at Scope we also have like people, context, triggers, and like, other bits of information about the people you're writing for. And I suppose it's, the main thing is being aware that you're doing it and kind of self-editing. I think the other thing is, like, if in doubt, go back to the user story, go back to the user researcher, and kind of, I suppose, just like really focus on what the subject expert is saying. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think sometimes it can, if you've like gone through a certain process yourself, it might be easier to work with a subject expert and then write up a piece because you've done it. But I think, again, it's that balance of using it so you create better content, but not using it so you create content that doesn't reflect the need, rather than it reflecting your own needs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chloe. There's another question in the chat from Izzy. Have you taken any training, or has it been more learning on the job? Izzy, I don't know if you want to add to that. It's fine if not.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it, I suppose. So I'm working as an SME just now, and I do bits of, I suppose, what I would call content editing. So I'm trying to like enhance those content design skills as well. I would love to work in content design at some point. So yeah, I'd be really keen to hear like, your sort of route in. Like, I know you've explained bits, but if you've got any sort of suggestions of any sort of formal training, or has it just been sort of more informal and learning through colleagues? I'm just really interested to hear about that.
Firstly, what is SME?
Oh, sorry. So, like subject matter expert. So I work fairly similar. I work giving advice, I suppose, of my experience, but as working as a careers advisor, but the content I think is quite similar. It's like advice type articles. So I'm working in that capacity just now, very closely with the content team.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Like, I've not had any formal training. I very much feel like I almost fell into it. It was almost like by chance that the secondment came up. And I think having a background as a blogger And I suppose kind of in a way writing advice content really like helped me, and I suppose in turn has made me a better blogger. I did notice when I became a content designer, my blog started to become bulleted lists and like properly formatted links, and I was like, oh, that sentence can be shorter. But I suppose, I want my blog to be more chatty and kind of informal. But I suppose you could say the only training I've had is, I suppose, like working on my blog. And I think I suppose I've been doing that for 10 years. And yeah, sorry, I can't kind of give any more advice. I think, being a subject expert and working closely with the content team is definitely like a step in the right direction, and definitely like what you would want to do. But yeah, sorry, I can't be more useful.
No, that's really, really helpful. Thank you. And I suppose reassuring to me as well that hopefully I can build up those skills as well. So well done. Sounds like you've done amazing, and hopefully I'll get there too.
Thank you. Like I'm sure you will. Like I feel like don't be afraid to like apply for the roles. Like even if you don't have experience, it sounds like you have the transferable skills to potentially kind of go into it. So yeah, I think that's important as well.
Claire, you've got your hand up. Is that specific to this question? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Fantastic. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that conversation, which was Izzy, in terms of like your kind of squiggly, like, and I'd say that none of us have a straight line to content design, and so I'd just add that wherever you can in your current role, just apply the content design principles to what you're working on. And so as and when that content design role comes up, you've got like a lovely kind of load of case studies and transferable skills that you can show. But yeah, those are my two cents worth.
Thank you, Claire. We've got some questions from, is it Diamond? I don't know if you want to speak, Diamond, or have me read them out.
Yes, hi. Thank you guys for having this. I'm in Washington, D.C., so I'm very excited to be here. I've been looking at content design for quite some time. I think I've been doing the work informally, but as I read more and I study more, I'm like, oh, I'm doing it. But the question that I had was like, how would you suggest someone start a blog or build up a portfolio if they don't have direct content at this time? And also, what documents have you created within the space of content? Thank you.
I think, anyone can start a blog, and I think your blog can become your portfolio, even if that's like linking to external things you've done, or kind of the blog posts showcasing your work. In terms of, sorry, I can't remember the second half of your question.
Oh, yes. So what documents have you created? Like, what documents can we create to show off our content design skills?
Yeah, so at Scope, it's the advice section within their website. I think in terms of like how I showcase that on my blog, I tend to kind of, I suppose, just link off to the live content. But I think if I was wanting to build a portfolio, I'd kind of save those elsewhere, whether it was like the documents or, like I said, kind of putting them on a blog, even if that's not necessarily like something you share, almost like an online CV, I suppose, in terms of the work you've done.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Brilliant. Do we have some more questions? Izzy is asking, what would you say is the best part of the job?
Ooh. I suppose, like, I'm always working on something different, and there are certain topics that take a lot longer. Like, I know Scope do a lot around benefits and things like that, but I think I like really enjoy the, I suppose, more like informal, like giving advice on for disabled people of like how they can enjoy themselves and how they can, I suppose, live the life they want to, because I think that's the end goal of Scope's content, is for disabled people and their families to live the life they want. And I think it's like the world of disability can be very complicated. And I think if I can make that a little bit simpler, then I suppose I've won. And I think it's important that we cover benefits and social care and all the really complicated things, but we also empower disabled people to be people and to kind of have hobbies and kind of know that they can do things like travel. That may sound like quite a bizarre thing, but actually, you know, some people don't realize that they can do that. And I think it's, I suppose, that more kind of like fun life things that I probably enjoy writing about the most.
That's great. Thank you. We've got a question from Alicia. Alicia, do you want to talk through it?
Yeah, I can. So I've said that content design can get quite emotional and exhausting, especially when we're working with some subject matter experts who don't quite understand accessibility and inclusivity criteria. We sometimes really have to fight them to make and write content that meets best practice and is accessible and inclusive. I'm just wondering if you feel being closer to some of these topics makes this easier or harder.
Probably say harder. Like, I suppose it's because if you're writing content about something, it's because there's a problem that people need the answer to. And if it's a problem you've been through yourself, I think it's even more kind of personal. Like, I know I've said about kind of, it's not about you and you do have to kind of leave yourself at the door. But I think, you know, being accessible and inclusive is especially a core part of Scope, as they are a disability charity. And I think, you know, sometimes people might want to use like the correct terms, and yet they're not the terms that the user understands or can relate to. I think it's also like something that can be quite difficult is the user might know what they need, or like, sorry, they know what they want, but they don't necessarily know what they need. So it's kind of being able to not only kind of make sense of that with the subject expert, but also then have that in a way that the user says, oh yeah, okay, this page is for me, this is the information I need. But then actually they do get all the information that includes that, not necessarily just what they're looking for. And I think sometimes subject experts can be potentially like, they have their core focus, but actually we need to look holistically at the bigger picture. And I think that can be something that's harder, definitely.
Thank you, Chloe. Does anyone else have any questions for Chloe?
Nia, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Well, I suppose you've seen me on both sides of the table.
Mhm.
How, like, is that, I suppose?
Oh, sorry, Chloe. You froze then. I don't know if that was for everybody or for me. Would you mind repeating it?
Yeah. I was just saying, like, you've seen me on both sides of the table. You've worked with me as a subject expert and as a content designer. And I suppose what's your perspective of how that crossover kind of helps or hinders?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean,
Sorry.
I only see it as, oh no, not at all, not at all. Yeah, I think I only see it as beneficial, really. Funnily enough, I was speaking with Catherine, who was just on the call. I think she's just left the other day about, we're often told that we are not the user, but actually sometimes we are, and I think you're right in that you've obviously got to take that subject expert hat off sometimes and, think, well, I don't know the full picture and my experience is just my experience. And lots of people go through different things. But I still do see it as really beneficial. When I worked with you when you were the subject expert, and we kind of had that, we did some pair writing. There were things there that I would never, ever have been able to, find out or research, and that came directly from your experience, and that is so important. So, yeah, I think it's only a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what other people think.
I think, like you say, actually sometimes we are the user, or we needed that previously in terms of content. But I think that kind of feeds back into my blog. I wanted to be someone who others could relate to because I didn't have anyone to relate to. So I suppose those principles can kind of come through whether you're currently the user of the content you're writing or you previously were. But yeah, I think it definitely helps if you are the user to kind of, I suppose, manage, like, to bridge the gap between technicality and lived experience.
Definitely. Yeah, you put it much more eloquently than I did. Yeah. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Not really a question per se, but I just want to say that as someone else with I'm not sure if your invisibility is invisible, but mine is. As someone with a disability working in content design, and who kind of went through a similar journey without the blogging and the fame and all of that, in terms of accepting myself and all of that. It's really nice to hear someone else's perspective and just kind of to know that we are out there and we are out doing good work, and it's important that all our experiences and everything are not only brought to the table but celebrated. So I just want to say it's really nice to have this session with you and hear from you. So yeah, that was me.
Thank you. I think that's, I suppose, like, I've actually met quite a few people who are disabled and within content design, and potentially that's because of the principles of content design of kind of creating things that are accessible and plain English, and kind of, like, people say that, like, obviously you want to write content that's easy to understand. Now, that doesn't matter whether you're disabled or you're stressed or you're in a rush. The needs from that perspective are very much, you need to find what you're looking for easily. And I think as someone who's disabled, potentially we need that more because we've got much more going on in the background and appointments to juggle and things like that, and potentially are big users of online content ourselves because we don't necessarily get told the answers, we've got to go looking. So I think actually maybe the principles of content design make disabled people good content designers.
I don't think I disagree with that at all. I think that makes a lot of sense. So yeah.
Well, I suppose we're natural problem solvers, and content allows us to solve those problems.
Absolutely, and I think I've realised that since being a content designer, my kind of threshold and everything for what level of content and what level of accessibility I'll accept is much, much lower. So I want the highest quality accessible content, and I think that's kind of accepting my disability and accepting my life as a content designer as well, and just wanting everything to be something that works for everyone. And I think being able to live that and know that that is kind of throughout my life and throughout my job as well is a nice thing. So yeah, I'm gonna put that on my CV. Thanks, Chloe.
No problem. Got to be a perk somehow, so I'm taking all the perks I can get.
That and the free bus pass, I'll take that.
Definitely.
Chloe, I've just posted in the content at Scope blog as well. Scope have a really great blog where they talk about how they approach content design, and it's well worth a read. But yeah, very much recommend it.
I have to say I've only written one blog on that. I feel like I'm the blogger within the team who has contributed less to the team blog. I'm sorry. I will do better. But yeah, there are some great stuff on there from my colleagues, whether that is about kind of getting into content design, because we previously had an intern, or kind of how we have reflected on our practices. I was doing a big piece of work last year about content patterns and kind of wrote up about that and kind of how I kind of got our procedure to kind of where it is now. There's also kind of a lot of information from my colleague Jack, who has written about accessible meetings and kind of, I suppose, best practices for that. And that's something they're very passionate about and do an amazing job at. So yeah, go have a look.
Well, any other questions then before we wrap up? Alrighty, I will pass over to Tom.
I don't know if I've got anything to add. That's great, Chloe. Thank you. Really heartwarming and really good. I can't. Anything else will just be trite that comes out of my mouth. But thank you for that.
We're people of written word, not spoken word. It's fine.
We will be back next month with another pep talk. We'll be in touch with you about that soon. If you haven't joined, I've put the link in the chat, and I'll do it again because I've made it all gone. Boo, boo, boo. Come along, be part of the party, be part of the support and the chat. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Nia. And thank you, everybody else, for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.